Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight we return to the Appalachian wilds, where hunters vanish among antlers, cabins whisper through their floorboards, and even a signal on an old radio can call you by name. These 10 stories are not legends. They are traces, left in torn jackets, burned letters, and voices caught on tape. Pieces of memory from people who walked out shaken, and others who never came back. If tales like these keep you watching, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, lock the door, and listen close. The sky was still bruised when I stepped out that morning, purple smeared with black, the sun nowhere in sight. It was late February, that strange part of winter when snow clings to shadows, but the rest of the ground turns soft and slick. I had my boots laced tight and my jacket zipped to the chin, the cold biting down through the seams. Hutch, the neighbor's mutt, barked somewhere up the hollow as I started along the ridge path. The air smelled like wet pine and old earth. Familiar, grounding. I'm Jonas Hale, 39, widower, and not much for conversation these days. I rent a 2-room place above Norton, where the trees thin out just enough to see the power lines stretch like ribs across the ridge. Most mornings I walk the fence line before work, just to move. My father used to call it walking the edge of the world, which sounded grand when I was 10. Less so now. Still, some part of me keeps the habit alive. I'd gone maybe half a mile above the creek when I noticed the fence. It wasn't just sagging or weather warped. The barbed wire had been cut, clean through, like with bolt cutters. No tearing, no stretching. The posts hadn't shifted. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. I crouched to check for deer tracks or maybe bear signs. But what I found didn't sit right. Just past the break in the wire, pressed into the frost, was a set of bare footprints. I stared at them for a long moment. 5 toes. Deep heel marks. Not a boot tread in sight. Too large for a kid. Too steady for someone drunk or sleepwalking. They led uphill, toward the ridge trail. The strides spaced even, like whoever it was had no trouble walking barefoot through ice. I told myself it had to be some transient, maybe on something, but the prints stuck with me. All day at work, up on the line outside Keoki. I kept picturing them, the clean cut in the wire, the way the toes had dug in like claws gripping the ground. I didn't sleep well that night. Next morning, same thing, same stretch of fence, same footprints, fresh in the frost. I checked the cut wire again. This time, it looked like someone had tried to twist the gap wider. I bent close, feeling stupid for how fast my heart beat. Nothing around me but trees and wind. I mentioned it to Gary, and my neighbor down the slope, over coffee later that day. He just laughed. Said maybe some vagrant was looking for shelter. Crazy ones come through sometimes, he said, waving it off like it meant nothing. I didn't press him. That night, I lay in bed with the window cracked open, listening. Just before 3, I heard it, the chain on my gate, rattling like someone had nudged it with their foot. Hutch didn't bark this time. No sound from the woods, just the creak of that old metal hinge. I stayed under the blanket, breathing shallow, not moving until the light bled gray across the ceiling. 3rd morning, I left earlier than usual. Still dark, but I couldn't help it. I followed the prints, past the broken fence, higher than I'd gone before. The frost crunched under my boots. My breath came in clouds. The trees started to thin, the ground leveling out into a clearing I hadn't seen in years. That's where I saw him. A figure crouched low by a tree, back turned to me, pale shirt loose over hunched shoulders, sleeves hanging. I opened my mouth to speak. Just a reflex. Hey, and was it to have you self? He turned fast, face pale, eyes too wide, and then he started moving down the slope, straight toward me. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. My boots slipped on the frost-slick grass as I backed up, one heel catching a root. I nearly went down, caught myself hard against a tree, and then took off running, full speed, crashing through the underbrush. The sound of him coming after me was worse than the sight, heavy footfalls pounding through snow crust and wet leaves. Steady. No hesitation. Like he'd done it before. The ridge path twisted sharp past a downed pine. I ducked under a branch, snagged my jacket, tore it free, and didn't stop. My chest burned. When the edge of my yard came into view, I sprinted for the shed, throwing myself through the door and slamming it shut behind me. I dropped the bar into place, heart trying to tear through my ribs, and reached up for the old hatchet hanging on the wall. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. For a long minute, nothing, just my breath, the wind, and the thin metal groan of the shed walls settling. I stood there with my back against the door, hatchet raised, trying to listen past the rush of blood in my ears. Maybe I'd lost him. Maybe he turned back. My arms ached from holding the hatchet tight. I lowered it a little. Then I heard it. A scrape, low and deliberate, like a boot dragging across gravel. Just outside, the shed door rattled once, then silence again. I stepped back just as the door exploded inward. The figure lunged through, hand catching the sleeve of my coat. I felt the tug, hard, cold fingers locking down, and tore sideways with everything I had. The fabric ripped clean, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the workbench. I didn't think, just dove through the side window, breaking the glass with my elbow. It sliced clean across my forearm as I hit the ground outside. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, tearing through skin. Mud grabbing at my boots. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could hear him, close behind, breathing hard. Every step a dull thud in the wet ground. The ridge blurred past, and I leapt across the rocky cut near the creek, barely clearing it, landing on one knee and scrambling up. My leg was numb. I didn't stop. The fence line came into view. I hit it full speed, barbs catching my pants, ripping the fabric. As I jumped, I felt it, a hand, fingers grazing my heel, clutching at nothing. 1 inch closer, and he would have had me. I crashed through the brush on the other side, rolled, and kept going. When I burst onto the road, I nearly got flattened by a coal truck. The driver slammed the brakes, horns screaming, headlights blinding me where I stood, arms up, covered in blood and sweat and mud. I turned back. The ridge stood quiet. Nothing crossed the fence. Nothing followed. Police came, took statements, walked the trails with dogs and flashlights, but found nothing. No prints. No signs of entry. Just the same stretch of barbed wire cut clean. They said maybe a drifter. Someone passing through. I didn't argue. I moved out a month later. Couldn't sleep there. Not after that. The hollow felt like it was watching me. Now, when I'm up early and the frost paints the grass silver, I still find myself scanning the ground. Old habit. And once, not long ago, outside the grocery store in Norton, I saw it. Just one. A single bare footprint in the slush by my truck. Pressed, deep, toes spread, fresh. The forest smelled like thawed earth and wet bark, green, even though the trees hadn't leafed out yet. Early April always brought that strange mix of cold air and soft light, when the snow finally melted, but the ground stayed slick and uneasy. I was up before the sun, walking the ridgeline of my uncle's old property. 40 acres of hillside and rock, not worth much unless you like being alone. I did. I'm Cal Weaver, 42. Been living in a converted shed not far from Seneca Rocks ever since the divorce settled 2 years back. My ex kept the house, the truck, most of what mattered. I kept the quiet, got a part-time job clearing trails for the Park Service. But most days it's just me, my tools, and a hand-crank radio to catch the forecast. It's enough, was enough, until I found the envelope. It was stuck halfway into the bark of an old poplar tree, like someone had wedged it there with a knife. The paper looked rain-warped, edges curled, but what caught my eye was the string, red, wrapped tight around the envelope in 3 even loops. I pulled it free, fingers numb with cold, and opened it right there. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, handwritten list, names in black ink, my name, Cal Weaver. At the top. Beneath it, 5 dates. One under the other. The last one. Today's date. I stood there staring at it while the wind moved through the bare branches overhead. My first thought was, trespasser. Some bored teenager. Maybe a hunter. But something about the writing, it looked too familiar. Slanted. Sharp. Like the way I used to write in my old notebooks when I was still trying to journal after the split. I folded the paper, shoved it in my coat pocket, and headed back down to the shed. Later that morning, I unlocked the old storage locker behind the shed. I keep some things in there. Old clothes, scrap gear, notebooks I never finished. The notebooks were scattered across the floor, pages torn, some missing entirely. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I'm not careless. I searched through them, flipping page after page, looking for the handwriting again. Some pages were gone, others slashed through with black ink. I felt cold all over, colder than the wind outside. That night, I stayed up late with the wood stove burning hot. The forest was quiet. Around midnight, I heard it, a single knock, flat and hollow, against the far side of the shed, not at the door, not near a window, just once. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was still. My boots crunched old leaves as I circled the building. No one there, but in the soft mud behind the shed, I found footprints, just a few, pointed away into the brush. I didn't sleep much after that, kept the flashlight beside the bed, the hatchet even closer. Next morning, I followed the prints uphill, past the property line, into the denser woods. A couple 100 feet past the ridge, I saw it, another poplar tree, hollowed at the base. Inside, tucked just barely into the shadows, was another envelope. Same red string, same type of paper inside. This one didn't have a list, just a photo, a picture of me, from the day before, taken from behind a bush near the trail. I remembered walking past that spot. I hadn't seen anyone. The air shifted, a breath on the wind. And then, through the trees, I saw it, someone ducking low, just out of sight, too still, too close, too real. I didn't shout, didn't call out or try to chase them. I turned and ran, straight back down the ridge, boots sliding on wet leaves, lungs burning from the cold. My legs carried me harder than they had in years. When I hit the clearing behind the shed, I didn't slow down, threw open the door. We slammed it shut and dropped the bolt across. The silence afterward was louder than the footsteps I thought I'd heard behind me. I barricaded the door with the woodpile I kept by the stove. Every board, every piece of scrap metal. Then I grabbed my duffel and started packing. Radio, tools, clothes, food, anything that would fit. I called Dale, an old buddy from Petersburg, asked if he could come with his truck tomorrow morning. I didn't say why, just told him I needed a ride out and I'd explain later. He didn't ask questions. I took the 2 envelopes out and burned them in the firebox. Watched the red string curl and snap, the paper darken and fold in on itself like it didn't want to be read in the first place. But even as the ashes settled, I felt it again, that creeping awareness in my gut, that watched feeling, like someone was just outside the glow of the windows. Right around dusk, I stepped out to take a piss and saw it, a figure, just barely visible through the tree line across the hollow. Standing still, too still. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe it ducked, maybe it just stepped behind something, or maybe I imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Back inside, I lit the stove again and cranked the radio. After a few seconds of dead static, music came through, some old fiddle tune, warbly and distant. For a few minutes, the sound calmed me. I sank into the armchair, the fire warm against my knees, and let myself laugh. Just a little. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe someone from town was pulling a prank and I'd overreacted. Maybe I needed to sleep. The flames were low and I started drifting off. Then a floorboard creaked. I opened my eyes slowly, heart hammering before I even moved. The door was still bolted, windows shut, but I knew. Someone was inside. I didn't think. I slid off the chair and moved to the far corner, where the panel in the floor was half concealed by the rug, pulled it up, crawled into the crawl space, and eased the panel closed above me. It was tight under there. Dirt floor, cobwebs, barely enough room to breathe. I lay flat, cheek pressed to the cold earth, eyes fixed on the seams of light above. Footsteps, heavy, measured, moving slowly, one step at a time, across the floor above me, boards groaning under the weight, then a pause, and then the sound of paper, rustling, being folded, or placed. My breath caught. A hand pressed flat against the floorboard above my face, pale, dirty, fingers spread like it was feeling for something. I didn't move, didn't blink, just waited, muscles locked in place, the earth pressing in on every side. Eventually, the steps moved away, fainter, then gone. When I climbed out at dawn, the panel hadn't been touched. The shed looked just as I'd left it, except for one thing. Pinned to the inside of the door was a third envelope, the same red string. Inside, another list. My name still at the top. Only this time, the final date was left blank. I never left. Not really. Dale came, and I told him I changed my mind. Said I was fine. Said I just needed a couple quiet days. He believed me. Now, every morning, I walk out to that old poplar, and I check the bark, just in case today is the day they decide to write it in. The snow had started 2 nights before I drove up, light at first, then thicker, sticking hard to the bends in the mountain road. By the time I reached the cabin, the tires were sliding on every turn, and my palms were damp on the wheel. Hutch paced in the back seat, whining once as the house came into view, half hidden in pines, roof sagging under a fresh blanket of white. I'm Beth Gentry, 31, divorced, no kids. I moved back to Greenbrier after my mother died last year. Her heart stopped in that same cabin, though I wasn't there. I'd already left West Virginia by then, moved to Pittsburgh, and tried to build something that didn't hold. Coming back felt like failure at first, but I've made peace with it. Winter's quiet here, which suits me. I rent out the place when tourists come through. But this time of year, it's just me and Hutch, and maybe the wind tapping the windows if I don't latch them tight. That first night, I built a fire, bled the lines so the pipes wouldn't burst, and unpacked the usual supplies. Canned food, bottled water, a bottle of bourbon I'd left in the pantry. There's no cell service out here. No internet either. That used to scare me when I was younger, but now it's a relief. No one texts me much anyway. Just before dusk, I pulled on my coat and stepped outside to fetch another bundle of firewood from the stack. The air had that dry, bitter edge to it that turns your breath sharp. Hutch followed close, sniffing the snow. I bent to lift a few logs, and then, clink, something behind me hit the porch. I turned fast. Nothing. My first thought was icicles, but I hadn't heard any fall. I patted my pockets, and my stomach dropped. The spare key. I always keep it in the left-hand chest pocket of my jacket, clipped to a small carabiner. The carabiner was still there. The key wasn't. I checked the porch, every corner, every board, even got on my knees and brushed the snow aside. Nothing. It could have fallen earlier. Maybe I hadn't clipped it right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard it fall. Right then, not earlier. The sound had been too clear, too close. That night, Hutch curled up beside the bed but didn't settle. Around midnight, he lifted his head, ears rigid. A low growl rose in his throat as he stared at the front door, unmoving. I sat up, listened, heard only wind rattling the old windows. I told myself it was a deer outside. They get close this time of year, looking for anything green. In the morning, the key was hanging on the hook inside the kitchen. Same spot I always kept it when I was staying there, but I hadn't brought it in. I know I didn't. I stood there, staring at it for a full minute. Hutch sniffed at my legs, wagging his tail like nothing was wrong. I went outside to look again. The snow was mostly undisturbed, except for one footprint near the back window. Just one, long and narrow, toe pointing toward the glass. I searched the whole place after that. Every door was locked, windows all latched, same as I'd left them. I even opened the attic hatch with a broom handle and checked with a flashlight. Nothing. Hutch followed me the whole way but stopped cold at the basement door. Wouldn't go near it. Later that night, the wind came in hard. I sat by the fire reading, trying not to think about the key. The logs shifted with a crack, and Hutch raised his head again. Then, I heard it. A soft creak. The basement door had opened. Hutch went rigid. Then he bolted, ran straight down the stairs, barking like he'd seen something. I grabbed the flashlight and followed. The air down there was colder, damp, the kind of cold that sticks to your bones. Even with a sweater on, I saw fresh, muddy footprints across the concrete floor, too wide to be mine, leading toward the back corner, behind the old furnace. Just as I stepped closer, flashlight shaking in my hand, something scraped, loudly, from the shadows behind it. And I wasn't alone. I didn't wait to see what made the sound. I bolted up the stairs, calling for Hutch. He shot past me halfway up, tail tucked, nails scrambling against the wood. I slammed the basement door shut and twisted the deadbolt hard, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. Then I shoved the dining chair under the knob, the way my mom used to during storms, back when I was little, and she said just in case without explaining what we were supposed to be keeping out. We slept, if you could call it that, in the bedroom, door locked, lights on. I kept the fireplace poker on the floor beside me, hand never far from it. Hutch dozed in starts, ears twitching at every creak, but he didn't bark again. I must have checked the time every half hour, counting down till morning, like it was a finish line. When dawn finally came, I half expected to find the chair knocked over or the door scratched, but everything was still and wrong. The basement was empty again. I waited till noon, till the sun had burned through the clouds, and the light made it feel less like a trap. The footprints were gone, wiped clean, like someone had come back to erase them. The air still held that wet, mildewy bite, but no sound, no movement. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe I'd tracked mud down there without realizing. Maybe Hutch had growled at nothing, and the wind opened the door. I wanted to believe that more than anything. I went outside, checked the perimeter. No tracks. Not one. The snow was untouched around every window, every door. No way anyone had come in. But then, how had the key made it back inside? How had the prints appeared in the basement at all? I spent the rest of the day cleaning, busying my hands. I almost left. Should have. But the roads were worse now. Ice thick on the curves. And I told myself one more night wouldn't hurt. That night, I barely turned the lights off. I laid in bed, fully clothed, poker in one hand, the phone in the other, though it had no bars. Hutch lay still this time, not even twitching, just breathing slow and steady. The fire crackled down to embers, and I started to drift. Finally, stupidly, when I heard it creak, a soft shift of weight on the floorboards outside my door. I froze, didn't breathe. Hutch didn't move either, but I know he heard it. His ears perked slightly. The sound came again, closer. Then I saw the doorknob twitch. The latch gave a quiet click. The door creaked inward, just an inch. Enough to see the sliver of hall, enough to know someone was there. I lunged forward, heart racing, and slammed the door shut with my shoulder. Locked it, braced it with my back, and then, a hand. Pale fingers reached through the gap, searching, nails scraping against the frame. I screamed and swung the poker. It connected hard with bone. The hand vanished. The door slammed shut so fast it rattled the frame. Silence. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat on the floor, back to the wall, poker across my lap, the eyes locked on the door till the sky lightened behind the curtains. At first light, I packed everything in under 10 minutes. Drove without chains, skidding through curves, white-knuckled all the way to my cousin's place, 2 towns over. I told her I just needed a break. Didn't say what happened. I couldn't. I never went back. Sold the place that spring to a couple from North Carolina who liked the idea of a mountain getaway. I didn't tell them anything, legally. I didn't have to. A month later, I got an email from the buyer. Said he was checking out the crawl space beneath the living room, where the boards felt soft. He found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, a phone charger plugged into the underside of the floorboards. Still warm. He asked if I'd ever used that space. I told him no. Blocked his email after that. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still hear it. That clink. A key hitting wood. Just once. Just enough. But there's no key on my ring that looks like the one I lost. The wind hit harder up on the ridge, cutting through my jacket like it had teeth. Mid-November always brought the kind of cold that felt personal. Dale didn't mind it. Never did. He was already halfway up the slope when I stopped to catch my breath, cursing the weight of the rifle slung across my back. I'm Marlon Cates, 45, mechanic by trade, reluctant hunter by blood. Dale lives for deer season. Me. I come for the tradition. Our dad used to drag us out into the hills, back when the trees still felt taller and the silence didn't weigh so heavy. This year, Dale had us hiking out near Cranberry Glades. He'd heard from a buddy about an old wooden blind overlooking a hollow thick with crossing trails. We found it just before noon, half-rotted, leaning a little back, but still standing. One wall bowed in like it had taken a hard hit years ago. We climbed up, set our gear, and settled in. The view was good. Down in the hollow, the brush lay low between the trees, already touched with frost. I poured coffee from a thermos while Dale glassed the ridgeline, whispering about last year's buck. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the clearing. The wind died down for a bit, and everything went still. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards out, tangled in the underbrush, a rack of antlers, full and wide, still attached to a skull. Not unusual by itself, except it was planted upright, wedged deep, like a signpost. The thing faced us, eyes long gone, sockets empty, but the angle, it looked deliberate. I nudged Dale. He squinted through the scope and gave a low whistle. Someone's messing around, he said. Kids, maybe. But I saw the way he shifted after. Like me, he didn't like how it faced the blind, like it was looking back. We tried to laugh it off. Still, neither of us talked much after that. As the sun dipped, the brush darkened into shapes. At first, I thought I heard deer moving through. Light snaps, maybe a hoof or two. But this was different. Heavy, measured, branches cracking in wide, deliberate arcs, circling the hollow like something pacing. We held still, rifles across our laps. When it got too dark to see through the scope, we climbed down. I took the lead. About 20 feet along the trail, I stopped hard. Another set of antlers, smaller, laid right across the path, like someone had set them there to stop us. Dale cursed under his breath. What the hell is this? This bondsman. We backed up, exchanged a look, and climbed back into the blind. No words after that. Just wind rising again, pushing through the trees like it had a purpose. I stared through the slats, Dale chewing his lip, eyes darting. Time slipped. An hour, maybe more. We were both nodding off when something moved directly underneath us. I froze, held my breath. Through the cracks in the floorboards, I saw it. A hand. Human. Dirt-caked. Reaching forward, dragging the same rack of antlers we'd seen before. And it wasn't alone. We didn't move. Not a twitch. Dale's boot was inches from mine, shaking slightly, but he stayed still, just like I did. The hand disappeared, and for a moment all we could hear was the wind pushing against the old wood. Then, nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no rustle. Just that deep, waiting silence you only get in the woods when something is holding its breath. We stayed up there as long as we could. Maybe an hour, maybe more. But the cold got mean. My hands stopped working right. I whispered to Dale that we had to move, that if we didn't, we'd freeze, before whatever was down there got a chance to reach us. He nodded, jaw tight. We unbolted the trapdoor slow, eased down like we were stepping into a grave. The path down the ridge was slick with frost. We didn't talk, just moved fast and low, rifles tight in our arms. About halfway down, Dale tripped. He caught himself before he fell hard, but the sound echoed, branches snapping underfoot like a firecracker. And that's when we heard it. Clack, clack. The sound of antlers knocking together, deliberate and slow, not from one spot, but from two, then three. We bolted. I don't remember how far we ran, only that the trees blurred past and the trail twisted underfoot. We found a rock overhang and crouched beneath it, gasping. My legs were burning, and Dale had mud streaked down one side of his face where he'd slipped. "Did you see them?" he whispered. "The shapes is all they chend in the many, in tonight's and a valiant day." I nodded, but I didn't want to say it. He kept going, voice trembling now. They were carrying antlers, strapped on their backs, on their shoulders, like cloaks, in the props and with codex. We sat there in the dark, listening. For a moment, the forest went still again. No wind, no clacking, just our breathing and the sound of my heart hammering in my ears. I almost believed it was over, that maybe we'd imagined it. Then the brush exploded. A figure lunged from the dark, hitting me full in the chest. I went down hard, grappling with it, cold fingers clawing at my coat, breath like rot in my face. It wasn't speaking, just hissing low through its teeth, eyes wild and sunken behind matted hair. Dale yanked me up, screaming at me to run. I turned back as he shoved the figure off me, heard the grunt as it hit him, the crack of wood breaking under weight. I saw him go down, saw more shapes moving from the trees, closing in with those racks of bone held like shields. I almost went back. I almost did. But I ran. Every step downhill felt like I was slipping through oil. Rocks, roots, brush tearing at my arms. The sound of bone clashing chased me through the dark. I didn't stop until I saw headlights. A coal truck passing the road's bend, just where the trail let out. I stumbled into the ditch, waving my arms, screaming. By the time the search parties went up there, all they found was our gear. Rifles, packs, the thermos still half full. They said Dale probably got turned around, maybe fell into a ravine or wandered too far. They looked for 3 days. I told them he slipped, that we got separated. I didn't say what I saw. Now, every time I walk past the taxidermy shop on Main Street, I catch a glimpse in the window, just for a second. A reflection of antlers. And behind them, Dale's face, watching me like he's still waiting in the trees. Late May still held its chill in the hills near Richwood. The days were thick with humidity, but by evening, the air cooled just enough to make the sweat on my neck feel sharp. I'd been out past 6 that night, walking an old rail spur that hadn't seen a train in 50 years, mapping out a patch of Japanese knotweed that was overtaking the slope. The trail curved past a thicket of locust trees and down a short embankment. I spotted the crumbled mouth of a mine, half buried in vines, black as pitch inside. Someone had left a flat stone beside it, like a makeshift seat. That's where I saw it. An old handheld tape recorder, the kind you see in movies. Plastic, scratched up, with a rusted clip on the back. It was coated in dirt, but when I turned it over, the battery light blinked red. I tapped play out of curiosity. For a second, it was all static. And then, "Carla, you're late. Is not con says, oversends and nows, in nacandations." The voice was male, calm, like it was reading from a script. I jerked my thumb off the button. My full name isn't printed on any trail gear, and no one out here knew me beyond the forestry intern. It had to be a prank. Some local messing around. Maybe planted it there. But that voice, it didn't sound like it was speaking to just anyone. It sounded like it meant me. I took it home anyway. Couldn't help it. Something about it felt personal. Like leaving it behind would have made things worse. I rented a basement room in a widow's house near the edge of town. Cheap and quiet, just a single window that looked out over gravel and weeds. I set the recorder on my dresser. Didn't touch it again. Not until midnight. I was half asleep when I heard the click. That soft mechanical noise, unmistakable in the dark. I sat up, every hair on my neck standing. The recorder was playing again, by itself. This time, the voice said, "You shouldn't have left. It's not rude." I didn't sleep after that. Sat in the corner chair, blanket wrapped around me, staring at the damn thing like it might jump. I thought about throwing it out, but something in my gut said not to, like it'd come back if I did. The next morning, I hiked straight back to the mine entrance, recorder in my pack. When I reached the stone, I meant to leave it there. I opened my bag, and it was gone. I searched the trail all the way back. Nothing. When I stepped into my room later that day, mud still drying on my boots. The recorder was back, sitting on the dresser, right where I'd left it the night before. The third night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I kept my boots on, flashlight ready, staring at the window as the clock crept past 2. Then I heard it. Gravel shifting outside. Slow and steady, like someone pacing just below the glass. The recorder clicked. Static. Then the voice again. "I see you now. They you noticed been broken." My skin went cold. I didn't move. Just watched as a shadow passed across the glass. Slow and silent. I wasn't alone. I didn't think. Just grabbed my boots, jacket, and the flashlight off the nightstand. The recorder still sat there, whirring softly, but I didn't touch it. I slipped out the back door, heart pounding so hard it blurred my hearing. The town was quiet. No cars. No porch lights. Just me and the gravel crunching underfoot as I ran, cutting across the dark field behind the widow's house toward the old rail spur. My only thought was to get to the highway. If I could make it to the shoulder, flag down a truck, anything, I could get out of town and not look back. But halfway there, I heard it. Footsteps, steady and slow behind me. Not running, just following, like whoever it was already knew how this would end. I turned once, saw nothing but dark trees, and kept going. When the path curved past the old mine entrance, I veered hard, lungs burning, and ducked beneath the collapsed timbers. I'd seen it that first day, a narrow crawl space just inside the debris, just wide enough to squeeze through if you didn't mind spiders and splinters. I dropped to my knees and shoved myself in, killing the flashlight and pressing flat against the cold earth. The silence that followed didn't comfort me. It felt wrong, held, like the woods were listening. I stayed perfectly still, breath shallow. The mine smelled like old stone and mold, and my hands were damp just from touching the ground. Then the recorder crackled. I'd forgotten it was still in my jacket pocket. Over the static came the whisper again. "Closer, closer. If you are dot." Outside, the footsteps stopped, right at the entrance. I clenched my jaw, couldn't move. The figure crouched. I could hear their breath now. Raspy, uneven. Stones shifted. Timber groaned. Dust fell in a slow trickle onto my hair. And then, fingers, rough and pale, brushed along the beams just above me, feeling for a gap. Testing. I pressed my hand hard against the recorder, praying it wouldn't play again. The whirring slowed. My heart felt like it was crawling up my throat. One word. Just one more. And he'd know exactly where I was. The finger stopped. A long pause. Then the breathing moved back. Slower this time. Further. Until I couldn't hear it anymore. I stayed there until the light changed. Until birds began to sing, and I could see the faint gray of dawn seeping through the boards. My legs were numb. Skin cold and raw. I crawled out, every joint stiff, blinking hard at the empty field beyond. No footprints, but sitting there, right where I'd first seen it, on the same flat stone, was the recorder. Clean, undamaged, waiting. I picked it up with shaking hands, pressed play. There was no static this time, no whisper, just my own voice, quiet and hollow. I see you now. He was not being. I dropped it, walked home without looking back. I still don't know what it meant, or who had the voice first, him or me, but I haven't touched the recorder since. I don't have to. It clicks on by itself now, always around midnight. We moved to Maple Street last June, right before the heat settled in for good. I remember unpacking boxes with the windows open, the kids running through the sprinkler in the yard, and the hum of cicadas loud enough to drown out my thoughts. It felt like a good place, quiet, familiar in the way that old towns are, porch lights glowing, dogs barking 2 blocks over, neighbors waving from across trimmed hedges. At 36, with 2 kids and a husband working long shifts at the hospital, I thought I'd finally landed somewhere steady. I'm Tessa Rowland. I do taxes from home, which sounds dull unless you like routine. I do. I like the predictability of numbers, the slow comfort of staying busy while the house falls into its nighttime hush. Most evenings, after dishes are done and the kids are in bed, I sit at the kitchen table with a laptop and a stack of receipts. The lamp casts a wide circle over the table, and beyond that, just the reflection of myself in the window. At first, I didn't notice the house across the street. It had been empty, according to our next-door neighbor, for at least 5 years. Belonged to an older woman, she told me once. Passed on. No one's wanted it since. But about a month ago, a car showed up. No U-Haul, no moving van, just a sedan that parked in the driveway one night and never left. Lights were on the next evening. That's how we knew someone had moved in. But the curtains never shifted. Not once. Same slight part in the middle window. Same folds hanging too stiff, like they'd been drawn and never touched again. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't dwell on it, until the night I looked up from my paperwork, around 11, and saw a figure standing behind those curtains. Not moving, just watching. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. I stared long enough that I forgot to breathe. The shape didn't move, but it wasn't some lamp reflection or shadow. It had weight. It had presence. When I finally stood and walked to the sink, it was gone. The next night, I left the kitchen light off, curious. As soon as I passed by the window, I felt it, that prickle along the back of your neck when you know someone's watching. I turned on the light, and, sure enough, the silhouette was there again. Not exactly the same spot, just closer. I didn't say anything for a few days. It felt ridiculous. But one evening, the curtains were opened wider. I could see more of the figure. Shoulders, a head tilted slightly, like it was leaning closer to see me better. My skin crawled. When I finally told my husband, he laughed. They're probably just curious. New neighbors and all. I wait. The next morning, I found a toy truck sitting neatly at the end of our driveway. One of those bright plastic ones with oversized wheels. I assumed my youngest had left it there. But when I asked, both kids shook their heads, swore they hadn't touched it. My husband shrugged it off. Kids misplace things. But I remembered putting that truck on the shelf in the garage the night before. After that, I kept the curtains drawn when I worked. I couldn't stop glancing at the window. One night, I peeked, just for a second, and there it was again, standing behind the glass, perfectly still. I didn't know what scared me more, the figure itself, or the fact that it never moved, never flinched, just stared. That night, something changed. I was working late, close to midnight. The figure stood in its usual place. I looked down to check a receipt, and my breath caught. On the wall beside me, a shadow stretched across the kitchen. Long, too wide to be mine. I wasn't alone in the house. I spun around, my chair screeching against the floor. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. Same as always. No sound. No movement. Just the slow hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock that suddenly felt too loud. My pulse hammered in my ears. The shadow had been real. I saw it, but there was no one there. I crept to the hallway, checked the kids' room first. They were both fast asleep, curled under blankets, their soft breathing steady. The house was quiet. Still, I called my husband. He was halfway through a double shift at the hospital. As I stepped out onto the porch with the phone pressed to my ear, I looked straight across the street. The curtains hung perfectly still. No silhouette, no movement, just darkness behind the glass. He answered groggily, half a sandwich in his mouth. I told him everything, voice low, trying not to wake the kids. The shadow, the toy truck, the figure behind the curtains. He didn't laugh this time. Said he'd come home as soon as he could get someone to cover. I stood on the porch until his car pulled into the driveway 40 minutes later. We checked the whole house together. Every room, closet, even under the beds. Everything was locked. No signs of forced entry, no prints on the floors. Still, he stayed up with me until I could breathe normally again. Told me I was probably overtired, stressed from work. I nodded. He said he was probably right. We went to bed with the hallway light on, just in case. It must have been close to 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first I thought I was dreaming. A soft creak, like weight pressing down on the floorboards. Then I heard it again. Our front door, slowly swinging open. The air shifted. I sat up, parted my throat. I stepped into the hallway just in time to see something move. Dark, slow, gliding toward the kids' room. I didn't think. I grabbed the first thing I could, a glass vase from the table, and threw it down the stairs. The crash exploded through the silence. Glass, skittering across tile. The figure stopped, just for a second. Then it turned toward the sound. I didn't wait to see more. I ran to the kids' room, scooped them both into my arms. They stirred, confused, but I whispered for them to stay quiet. We slipped barefoot through the back door, out into the grass, breath misting in the cool air. From the yard, I looked back once. The front door stood wide open. The figure was still inside, slowly turning in place, scanning, searching. Police showed up 20 minutes later, took statements, swept the house. No forced entry, no signs of anyone, no footprints on the hardwood. They found the shattered vase, but nothing else. No explanation. The house across the street, empty again. The car vanished 2 days later, curtains drawn tighter than before. Dust already gathering in the corners of the windows. Weeks passed. Summer thickened. I tried to let it go. But sometimes, when I'm working late and the lamp is on and the kids are asleep, I catch myself glancing across the street. And sometimes, only sometimes, I swear I see it again. A shape behind the curtains. Still, watching, waiting for me to look back. The ridge trails always felt different after dark. Cooler, quieter, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I'd walked them since I was a kid, first with my grandfather, later on my own. Now I carry his old lantern. Heavy brass, smoky glass. Every time I go out after sundown, it doesn't throw much light anymore, but it's steady, and it feels like protection in places where the trees grow too close. I'm Eli Carden, 27, born in Tucker County, and likely to die here. If the roads or the mines don't get me first, I work a part-time shift at the Exxon in town. But summers, I help my cousin watch over a stretch of private land near Dry Fork. Folks used to hunt there, but it's been fenced and locked for years now. My job's simple: check the gates, walk the trails, keep kids from trespassing. It's quiet work. I like quiet. That night, it was just past 9. The air still held some heat from the day, but the shadows under the trees were cool and thick. I was halfway down a trail we called Devil's Elbow, following a bend where the switchbacks double back hard. That's when I saw it, a glow, soft and orange, swaying through the trees ahead. At first, I thought it was reflection, maybe my own lantern catching on something, but it moved when I moved, matched my pace, stopped when I stopped. too far to see clearly, but close enough to feel. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a lantern, just like mine. And no one was supposed to be out there. I called out, "Hello." Nothing but cicadas. Then, quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring. The light rocked once, then blinked out like someone had cupped it in their hands. I stood there longer than I cared to admit, heart racing, before I turned back toward the cabin. It was an old hunting shack with a padlock on the door and a single window that rattled when the wind hit it wrong. I locked the door behind me, even though I hadn't had to before. Dry Forks, remote. People don't just show up. But sometime past midnight, I heard gravel crunching by the gate. Not much, just one step, maybe two. I peeked out. Nothing there. No wind, no critters, just that same wide silence from the trail. The next evening, I walked the ridge again, this time during daylight. Sun high, nothing strange. But down by the bend, I saw boot prints in the soft dirt, not mine. Too fresh, too clean. They followed the trail, circled the cabin, stopped at the back door, where the deadbolt rust shut from disuse. That night, I slept with my boots on. I didn't think much could rattle Hutch, the neighbor's coonhound who sometimes stayed up at the cabin with me. But just before midnight, he went wild, barking sharp and low, hackles up, staring out the window like he saw something I couldn't. I followed his gaze and felt the blood drain from my face. There it was, the lantern's glow, bright and steady, hanging at the tree line. And then, it started moving, fast and low, straight toward the cabin. I killed my own lantern and grabbed the shotgun from the wall. It was mostly for snakes and the occasional nosy raccoon, but it was loaded all the same. Hutch backed into the corner, growling now, eyes still fixed on the window. I stood just inside the door, watching through the gap in the curtains. The shotgun braced tight against my side. The glow slowed as it reached the clearing. It stopped maybe 20 feet from the porch. Too close. It didn't flicker or sway now, just burned there, steady and deliberate, like it knew I was watching. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No sound. Then the glow vanished, blinked out like someone had pinched the flame. I forced myself to step out onto the porch, the shotgun raised. The woods were silent. Even the cicadas had gone still. I walked the perimeter, each step loud on the packed dirt, but there was nothing. No lantern, no footprints, just the trees and the heavy, unmoving dark, pressing in from every side. Back inside, I locked every door and window, drew the blinds, and waited with the shotgun across my lap. I didn't sleep. Hutch didn't either. He stayed by the door, ears up, tail low, is the way dogs do when they know something's close that shouldn't be. By morning, everything looked normal again. The trees outside danced in the wind. The dirt was dry and undisturbed. I packed my things and told myself I was heading back to town. I'd explain it all away later. Probably a trespasser, maybe some weird light trick, heat exhaustion. I didn't care what story I chose, just as long as I could shut the door on this place for a while. But that evening, just before leaving, I did one last check around the cabin, just a walk through habit, I guess. The woods were too quiet. No bugs, no birds, still air pressing against my neck. I walked the trail, made the loop, and came back toward the porch. That's when I saw it. The lantern, hanging from the cabin's doorknob, lit, burning steady. I froze. And then the doorknob twisted. It wasn't slow this time. It was sudden, like someone already had their hand on the other side. I didn't think. I raised the shotgun and slammed the butt into the lantern. Glass shattered, flame flared, then puffed into darkness. Sparks scattered across the dirt. The knob stopped turning. I backed away, heart pounding, gun still raised. Hutch barked once, sharp and loud, then fell quiet again. I waited, but no one opened the door. No one moved. The woods stayed silent. At sunrise, I left Dry Fork. Didn't even lock the place behind me. My cousin leases the land now. I never told him what I saw. He brings up the old cabin sometimes, how the lantern's still hanging in the shed, though he doesn't remember leaving it there. I just nod. Sometimes, driving past on Route 32 at night, I glance toward the ridge. And once, just once, I saw it again. That soft, orange light weaving through the trees, moving at the same speed as my car. It faded behind me, but I still keep one eye on the mirror, always checking. I moved to eastern Kentucky at the tail end of summer, chasing cheap rent and space to breathe. The town was small, tucked between hills that lit up like fire in October. I taught when the schools needed me, filled the rest of my time walking old farm roads with a sketchbook under my arm. My grandmother used to do the same. Charcoal outlines of barns and rusted tools. The kind of simple things that disappear if nobody remembers them. The orchard sat past a narrow gravel turnoff. No sign or mailbox. Just a break in the tree line and a sloping field beyond. Rows of apple trees stretched into the hill. Many, half dead or leaning, branches tangled with vines. The ground was soft, blanketed with yellowed leaves. No house nearby. No sound but wind and birdsong. A dry stacked stone wall ran along one side, barely waist-high and crumbling in places. That's where I found the well. Toward the far end of the orchard, tucked near a split in the wall, there was a circular pit of stacked stone, capped with a wide, flat slab. I thought it was just another relic, maybe an old planter or foundation stump, until I noticed the handprints. Moss covered most of the lid, but near the center, where the green had been smudged away, were two clear prints, fingers splayed, deep enough to show where someone had leaned in. Fresh. Recent. I knelt beside it, fingertips hovering just above the marks. The stone was cold, solid. I didn't try to move it. Not then. Just sketched it quickly. The shape of the stone and the prints. A few lines of the surrounding orchard. The light was fading fast. I packed up and walked home with the chill settling on my neck. Next day, after school let out, I went straight back. Couldn't help it. Something about the well tugged at me. This time, as I stepped off the main path, I noticed a line of pine cones laid out in the dirt. Neat, spaced exactly a foot apart, leading from the edge of the trail straight to the well. I paused, stared at them a long while. Kids, I told myself. Some strange game, but the spacing was too careful. No scuffs, no prints, just a trail of dry cones pointing like an arrow to the stone. I didn't stay long, just enough to snap a photo, walk the orchard once more, and head back before dusk. That night, while flipping through my sketchbook, I found something that stopped me cold. A page near the middle, one I hadn't touched in weeks, was filled with charcoal circles. Concentric rings, drawn tight and overlaid. No signature, no margin notes. I don't remember drawing them. By the third afternoon, I'd convinced myself I had to know what was beneath the lid. I returned to the orchard, both hands on the slab, and pushed. It didn't take much. The stone groaned, shifted, just enough to open a narrow gap. Cold air rushed up, not foul, but damp and wrong. Like freshly dug dirt. I held my sketchbook over the opening, trying to angle in some light, and something pale shifted far below, near the black water, not moving away, staring up at me. I didn't scream, didn't move for a full breath. Whatever it was, it hadn't blinked or shifted again, just stayed still at the bottom, watching. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the sketchbook, watched it tumble down into the dark and land with a soft splash. That jolted me back. I threw my weight into the stone lid, dragging it back across the mouth of the well. It groaned louder this time, like something below didn't want it shut. The sound echoed, low and scraping. As soon as it was covered, I turned and ran. Branches snagged my sleeves. I didn't care. I didn't stop until I was off that road, back in town, and behind the locked door of my rented room. I didn't sleep, couldn't stop picturing the thing below, pale and silent, waiting. Next morning, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I'd report the well if I had to. I even thought about calling the sheriff. But then I saw it. My sketchbook, leaning against my front step like someone had returned it. The cover was damp, pages warped. I picked it up with 2 fingers like it might bite. Inside, the charcoal circles had spread, more pages filled, each drawing darker, tighter, like they'd been pressed in by a shaking hand. My name was written faintly in the margin of one, not in my handwriting. That night, I locked both doors, slid a chair under the knob, and left the porch light burning. I told myself one more day. If nothing happened, I'd pack up and move again, like I always did. And for 2 days, the silence held. No sounds outside, no new sketches. I started to believe it was over, that maybe my mind had broken loose a little too far from sleep. Then came the 3rd evening. I came home to find the front door wide open. Nothing was taken, furniture untouched, dishes still drying on the rack. But my kitchen table wasn't empty anymore. The pine cones were there, 12 of them, arranged in a perfect circle. Before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me, fast, like it had been waiting. The locks clicked, deadbolt first, then the chain. My hands hadn't touched them. From the back of the house came a sound that froze my blood, stone dragging across wood. Slow, heavy, scraping as it moved room to room, like someone was pulling that same slab from the orchard across my floors. I ran to the window, tried to open it. Wouldn't budge. Nails in the frame. The air grew heavier, thicker, with each step of that dragging sound as it came closer. Floorboards creaked under weight I couldn't see. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, waiting for the knob to turn, for the wood to crack. But nothing came. Just silence. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. I was lying in the orchard grass. Cold dew clung to my arms. I had no memory of how I got there. My house keys were gone from my pocket. I walked back, barefoot and numb. The house looked untouched, clean. The pine cones were gone. So was the slab. Back at the orchard, I found the well open. No lid, just dark water, perfectly still. At the bottom, floating near the center, was my sketchbook, open to a blank page. I leaned over, drawn in, and as I watched, new circles began to appear, drawn by no hand, just ink bleeding from nothing, spiraling slowly across the paper, like something below still wanted to be remembered. I hadn't been back to that ridge since the last contract cycle ended. The cabin, a tiny, one-room structure tucked just beneath the tree line, still smelled like burnt pine and rat droppings. Autumn had come down hard this year, stripping the poplars bare and laying fog across the foothills like a dog that wasn't sure it was welcome. The gravel path branching off the old ranger road was nearly swallowed in wet leaves, and my boots slid twice, just getting up the slope. My name's Marisol, 32. I used to run RF diagnostics for a tower contractor that serviced these mountains, mostly testing for interference bands from outdated relay stations. 6 months ago, during one of those checks, I picked up a strange flutter on the 41, 9 megahertz's band, an analog bleed with something faint beneath it. It was almost like breathing. At first, I figured it was a dirty signal bouncing off rock, but the wave pattern didn't fit. I recorded it, filed the report like I was supposed to, and then kept the original copy for myself. I didn't tell the team I was coming back up here. The trip wasn't official. I just couldn't stop thinking about the way that noise sounded when it peaked. 3 short pulses, then a gap, and then what could have been a syllable. It wasn't words, not exactly, but it stuck with me, and I wanted to see if it would repeat. So I packed a narrowband scanner, a multi-antenna rig, and a few days' worth of canned food, and made the hike up alone. No reception, no trackers, just me and the equipment. The first night was calm, cold, damp, but not unusual for this high up. I set up the scanner on the ridge beam and ran the antennae through the loft window, then dozed in my sleeping bag with a thermal wrap around my neck. Around 1:40 a.m., the receiver crackled, not the usual hiss and pop from static, but something more regular, like a timed sequence. I sat up, blinking at the pale screen, and turned the gain higher. At 1:42 a.m., it came through again, a thready, electronic whisper, almost rhythmic. I leaned in, headset tight, and for a moment I swore I heard my name, Marisol, but the modulation was strange. Pitch rolled like the speaker was underwater or behind thick glass. I replayed the clip 3 times and still couldn't decide if it was real speech or pareidolia. I checked my phone out of habit. No service. Not even 1 bar. I marked the timestamp and shut it down, figuring maybe I was more tired than I realized. But something didn't sit right. The voice had sounded, inside, not like it was being picked up from a distant repeater or bounced from an old weather tower. More like it was whispering from the headset wire itself, as if traveling up the cord into my ear. I turned on the cabin lantern and scanned the room. Nothing. Just dust, gear bags, and a tin mug half full of cooling instant coffee. The next morning, the receiver had reset itself. It was still running, but the log file was gone, timestamp erased. I hadn't touched it. The battery pack was at 60%, and I always enable auto-logging. I double-checked the SD card. Empty. I stood there for a long while, one hand on the wood stove, watching my breath coil in front of my face. Then I ran a full system diagnostic, told myself it was a glitch, and powered everything back up. That afternoon, I climbed up the northern crest about 100 yards behind the cabin, hoping to get better line of sight for the scanner. That's when I saw it, a short antenna spike, jammed into the ground behind a rock shelf. Not mine. Definitely not part of my equipment. Black composite, commercial grade, scratched up, but active. The LED blinked red. Faintly, I approached it slowly, noting the serial number, scratched out. There was no power cable, just a slight hum, barely audible, pulsing like a heart. By sundown, the fog had rolled in again, thicker than the night before. I closed the shutters, made tea on the propane stove, and tried not to think about the signal. But just after 10, the receiver snapped to life on its own. No touch, no timer set, just a solid tone, then silence. And then, faintly, Marisol. Louder this time, clearer, closer. I stood perfectly still. Outside, something moved past the shutter. Not footsteps, not wind, just the shift of weight, like something had paused to listen. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I stayed wrapped in the thermal bag, with the headset still dangling around my neck, one boot halfway on, the other under the sleeping mat in case I needed to run. Every creak in the beams felt too specific, too deliberate, as if the whole structure was flexing under observation. But nothing touched the door. And, by dawn, the signal had gone dead again. No audio, no heartbeat, pulse from the mystery antenna outside. I packed the scanner into my day pack and decided to hike toward the trailhead. I had no intention of waiting around for another whisper in the dark. The antenna was still there behind the rock, blinking faintly, and when I approached it again, the pulse had slowed, as if it sensed something had changed. I didn't touch it. I took a photo, backed away, and followed the switchback trail east. Half a mile in, the fog thickened like wet wool. The trees closed in tighter, and the path underfoot shifted. Roots, where there hadn't been roots. Branches reaching across in ways that didn't match my memory. I knew these woods. I'd mapped them years ago for the comms company. But now, every bend looked like the last. I checked my GPS. No signal. I turned off the trail and climbed a slight ridge to try for elevation. But everything below was just a gray soup of treetops and moving mist. By noon, I'd circled back to the cabin without realizing it. The path had looped without warning, and there it was again. My footprints from that morning, the little can of beans I'd dropped near the porch. Still dented and cold, except the antenna was gone. The rock was still there, the shelf still damp from last night's dew, but the blinking red light vanished. I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I'd walked past the real trail and looped a lower fire line. I checked my gear, recharged the battery pack, and pulled up the software logs again. The scanner had recorded something during my hike. A short burst. 8 seconds. Of static, layered with low-frequency speech. I pressed play. It was my voice, saying, "Turn around," over and over. The timestamp matched a moment I remembered, just before I changed course and unknowingly circled back to the cabin. I stayed inside the rest of the day, brewed weak tea, sat by the stove, and pretended I couldn't still feel something watching from the tree line. Just after dusk, the lantern flickered. Then the receiver activated again. This time it didn't whisper. It played back a full minute of recording, my voice, breathing, walking, whispering hello, the same way I'd done an hour ago when testing the mic in the yard. But I hadn't been recording then. I hadn't been speaking into anything. Then something knocked. Not on the door. On the wall behind the bed, where there was no window. No porch access. Just wood and hillside. One sharp knock. A pause. Then another. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and edged toward the door. But the knob was too cold. Too slick. Not from condensation. From something else. My skin recoiled when I touched it. Like oil. Or static charge. Crawled up my arm. The signal spiked again. Headset screaming. I ripped it off just in time to hear the knock again. But this time, it echoed inside the cabin like it came from under the floor. Then the voice came one last time. Through the speaker. But wrong. Distorted. A day. Not in English. Not quite Vietnamese either. A blend. I hadn't spoken that language in years. I didn't imagine it. I ran. I grabbed my pack. Left half the gear. And bolted out into the fog. My boots slipped on wet leaves. Ankle scraping stone. But I didn't stop. I didn't care if I was heading north or straight into a ravine. I just needed to get off that ridge. The forest howled like it had lungs. Like it was exhaling through every branch. Every crack in the bark. And just when I slipped on a slick patch of moss, arms windmilling, something caught my jacket. A tug. A firm pull from behind. I didn't look back. I twisted, kicked free, jacket tearing at the shoulder, and crashed down the slope. Dirt in my mouth, blood in my nose. I landed hard between two mossy stumps and lay there, chest heaving, ears ringing. If I'd moved a second slower, if I hadn't twisted exactly when I did, I don't think I would have made it. Whatever had grabbed me wasn't animal. The fingers were too long, the grip too still. They found me at sunrise, wandering near the base road, jacket torn, half my equipment missing. I didn't explain much. It just said I'd slipped during a survey hike. Nobody asked about the black antenna. The SD card from my scanner was blank, overwritten. But the last file in the folder was dated a day ahead of the real calendar. And the file name, Marisol, WAV. I never went back to that ridge. I transferred out of comms 6 weeks later and left the field entirely. But sometimes, when fog hits the city just right, I still hear that tone. 3 pulses, a gap, and then the breath of something, trying to speak through wires that were never meant to carry voices. The first night was quiet except for the wind. There was no TV in the cabin, no Wi-Fi, and I left my phone powered off in the glove box. I'd brought only a stack of library books and an old thermos of coffee that hadn't kept warm past the second hour. The fire didn't take at first. Chimney flue was sticky with creosote. Hadn't been cleaned in years. But once the kindling caught, it was enough. Outside, the wind moved the trees like slow ocean tides. And somewhere further up the ridge, a dog barked once, then stopped. Folks call me Kyle, 34. I took the cabin for the week because I needed to be somewhere. People didn't ask too many questions. Just me, the woods, and a few days without expectations. I'd grown up not far from this hollow, about 2 ridges over, in a house with more patches than drywall. And though I'd moved away after my dad passed, I still remembered how the pines here smelled after rain. It felt like a place that wouldn't mind if I stayed quiet. It was near 1 in the morning when I heard it. 4 footsteps across the porch. Slow and deliberate. Not boots. Not paws. Something flat. Weighty. It's steady. The kind of step someone takes when they know exactly where each board is. They stopped right before the window. I waited, holding my breath, listening for a knock, or the scuff of a shoe turning. Nothing. When I finally worked up the nerve to check, the porch was empty. But the fifth floorboard, the one right before the door, creaked louder than the others when I stepped on it. It echoed, hollow underneath. I figured it was just the wind and old wood settling. Still, I made a mental note to grab a hammer and nails from the supply shed the next day. I'd spent enough nights on worn-out porches growing up to know the way damp timber swells and groans. In daylight, that explanation would hold. But something about those steps, the rhythm, the silence after, felt too controlled. Not like an accident, like a routine. The next morning, I found fresh frost on the windows and two small indentations in the mud by the steps. Could have been boot prints. Could have been runoff shaping into odd shapes. Either way, I hammered the fifth plank down tight, wedging a rock under the corner to keep it from bowing. I kept telling myself it was maintenance. Nothing more. I brewed coffee in the percolator and spent most of the day chopping fallen limbs out back, trying to keep busy, keep warm, the rhythm of axe, branch, breath. It helped. But the following night, right as the clock blinked, 1:13 a.m., the sound came again. 4 steps, same tempo, same pause. This time I sat up straight in the cot before the last one fell. I stared at the door. The fifth board didn't creak, not loudly, but I could feel the pressure through the floor, like someone was standing still, just past the threshold, deciding whether or not to come inside. I didn't open the door. I told myself if I stayed still, if I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it would leave. It didn't. It just stood there. No knock. No voice. Just the sense of weight pressing down, waiting. And then, after a full minute, it was gone. No retreating steps. No wind shift. Nothing. By the third night, I was afraid to sleep. I lay on the cot in my boots, flashlight in one hand, waiting for the sound. And like clockwork, 1:13 a.m., it came. 4 steps. Silence. But this time, when I crept to the window and peeked through the warped glass, I thought I saw a shape leaning by the far end of the porch. Tall, unmoving, just barely visible beyond the overhang. But when I turned on the porch light, there was nothing there. Just a button lying on the fifth plank. Round, metal, worn smooth, still warm. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. I sat in the chair by the window, button clutched in one hand. Flashlight pointed at the door. Nothing else happened. Just the wind, sighing through the trees, and my own thoughts getting louder. By sunrise, my knuckles were stiff, like I'd been holding a rope too long. I put the button on the table, but even then I kept glancing at it, like it might move if I looked away. I told myself I'd leave, pack up early, head back down the holler and get back to town. But I didn't. Instead, I started tearing up the fifth board to see what was beneath. The nails fought back. Someone had hammered it deep. When I finally pried it up, I found a gap between the joists and a small space stuffed with something dry and crumbling. I pulled out a wad of paper, yellowed and brittle, edges eaten by mice. The top sheet was covered in thick, smeared pencil marks. Just one line, written over and over again. Only 4, never 5. And we could do the never thing. I didn't understand what it meant. Maybe it was some old superstition, a local joke, or just the scribblings of a bored kid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the rule was real, not metaphor. I folded the papers, tucked them in my coat pocket, and boarded the plank back down. This time without a nail, just laid it in place. It didn't creak that afternoon, but I still avoided stepping on it. That night, I set up my phone to record. No camera, just audio. I placed it near the door, next to the fifth step, then sat back by the stove and waited. 1:13 came, and so did the sound. 4 steps, same weight, same pause. But this time, there was something else. A second set. Lighter. Slower. Stopping just behind the first. I froze. Breath caught halfway up my chest. I didn't move until the sun rose. When I checked the phone, the recording had stopped at exactly 1:14, but the last few seconds had caught something. Not just the footsteps, but breathing. Two people. It sounded like one shallow, strained, the other calm. And then, a whisper I didn't hear in real time, 6 is the last. He self-designed. I packed my bag right after that. Threw everything into the truck bed. Didn't even sweep the ashes out of the stove. But as I locked the cabin door, I felt the floor flex beneath me. I looked down. I was standing on the 5th step. The board groaned under my weight, long and low, like a warning. Before I could shift off, something scraped the wall, just inside the door, like a nail being dragged in a slow circle. I didn't look back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and backed down the path without checking the rear view. I returned once, 2 weeks later, with a deputy. The owner had called me, confused about the damage to the porch and the strange recording still looping on the cabin's old weather radio. We found the 5th board pried loose again, and someone, definitely not me, had carved tallies into the wood. 5 lines, with a 6th halfway drawn. I live with my sister now, in a 2nd-floor apartment 3 towns over. I don't walk barefoot anymore. Every creak in the floor makes my skin go tight. Some nights, when it's quiet, I hear it again in my head, step, 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 pause. The 5th step always comes last. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear a 6th.